Hi. Today I've got another tale from my past I'm going to tell you, but it's also going to have a point that I will get to at the end of it, which is a better way of doing it than doing it at the beginning. Anyway, I have lost a few jobs, and you can't say that any of them were really my fault, although I didn't always really believe that. In this particular instance, I was director of the patient accounting department of a small hospital in Rome, New York. And it was also a military city. And I knew at least something about the air base. I really didn't know anything about the city going in, but I'd had some great recommendations to go in there. And so I did. And I was there for 2.5 years before I got let go under what I thought were very interesting circumstances. So here's the deal. From the time I got there to 18 months later, based on things that I personally did that they weren't doing beforehand, we increased revenue by about $8 million from the previous year, and we increased cash by $18 million. Now, based on some of the hospitals I worked at later on, that's not a lot of money, but this is a hospital that was less than 200 beds, which means nothing to most of you except that, well, most city hospitals have over 500 bed hospitals. So this is kind of a big deal. In New York City, they have 1,400 bed hospitals, but I couldn't do anything with a hospital that big by myself. Or maybe I could. In any case, I had done some really good stuff for that hospital. I had helped them to figure out how to use their computer system. I had trained a lot of people. We were humming at one point. Then they did something, not necessarily the hospital, the city, because it was a city-owned hospital at the time. And what they did was they decided that it was time to give all the employees civil service exams. And the problem with civil service exams is that they're not geared towards the job someone does. It's geared towards a job classification that the city gives it. And they hadn't given this test in like 7 years. So no one really knew what to expect. So they gave this test to all the people in my department. I actually had to take one for my job, and some of the questions had nothing to do with anything I did. Yet, out of 4 people, I was the only one who passed. Pat on the back. Anyway, almost all the people who worked for me did not pass their test, which would have been catastrophic because usually when that kind of thing happens, you have to fire people. And so they went to all kind of things. They panicked. They had to work hard with the union. It was a pretty strong union. And they ended up retaining all the people, or at least almost all of them. But they had to take a lower classification of job status to keep it, which basically means that most of those people had a reduction in pay. Now, if you think you're going to lose your job, that's hard enough. If you have a reduction in pay, that's even worse. And the thing is, there was no studying for a civil service exam. I mean, my exam, for instance, asked things about maritime and boating. That's like, what the devil is this? Yet I was able to pass. So anyway, there was all kind of turmoil for a while there. And in the middle of all that, the hospital decided that they were going to do something that I thought was really stupid to do. And I'm not going to get into that part of it because no one really cares. But what I did from my position, I was a director, is I basically told them in a meeting that their thought was wrong. And a lot of times folks don't like being told that their stuff was wrong, but I thought I had earned my way. I had increased their cash. I had increased their revenue. I had an idea of what it was that they were looking to do, and the numbers that they came back with were just faulty. They just were. So the long story shortened is that pretty much a year after the initial meeting where they said they were going to do this thing, I ended up losing my job. And the guy, when he came in to tell me that he was letting me go, said, "I think that you were in over your head." And I'm like, well, how was I in over my head? Look at the things that I had done. And we had had this review from a consulting company which basically said, hey, look at the great stuff this guy did. So I decided to challenge. It was going to be a losing battle, but I decided to challenge. So I get my lawyer, and the city gets their lawyer, it gets their judge. So it's me basically going against the city. Now, they did make a settlement offer. A settlement offer was for 25% of my salary, just as a lump sum. I said, no, that's not going to happen. So anyway, we go through this trial, which it was actually 2 trials because the initial lawyer for the city resigned so he could run for mayor, which he didn't win. They brought in some other guy. They did all this stuff. It was just ugly. And my lawyer was going through some legal stuff. Basically, a year after my case ended, he lost his license, which ended up helping me because I didn't end up having to pay him, because once lawyers lose their license, they're not allowed to bill anymore. And I can't say that he did the best job for me, but he was not bad. Anyway, I lost my job. I sued, and I lost on every point except one. And it was such a stupid point that winning that one didn't win me any favors. And I was angry. I was angry for years. I was mad, and I started to wonder, okay, really, was I that bad? How did I get those good numbers up front and suddenly I lose my job? And I was angry, and I just said, you know what, this stinks. I don't know what happened. Years go by. I suffered some after I lost that job. Then I worked my way back up. So years later, I'm now a director at another hospital in another town. And I'm in this national organization, but I'm in the local chapter, and I'm on the board. So now I have a little bit of cash behind me. And I go up to a conference, and there's a guy there who I hadn't seen since the trial, since the first one that got canceled. Now, the funny thing is, they brought in the auditors, or this consulting company who was the auditors, to basically back them up, but they didn't get to testify because basically we had one day, we had 2.5 hours, and then it ended, and it was over for like 6-7 months. So I saw him kind of sitting there, and I walked over and I said, and I'm not going to say his name, but I said, can you tell me what happened all those years ago? What really happened? Because that's been bothering me ever since. And I noticed you guys didn't come back for the second trial, so tell me what happened. And he said, we were told that there was this area that you were responsible for, and they were failing at this, and they said that you were in charge of it. So we could only go off of what they were telling us at the time. So we were going to be there to support what they said because this is how we thought things were. After they had to postpone the trial, then they got rid of a few people, and we went back and looked, and we realized that we had been lied to, that you had no responsibility whatsoever for what they were blaming on you. Other powers that were higher than you actually messed things up. And so we told them, okay, we cannot now come back and support you in the trial because that would be perjury, because we know that you did this stuff against this guy. We're talking about me. So we are going to step away. At the same time, they had a confidentiality agreement in place, so they couldn't say anything to me either. So he knew. But he tells me this on the slide, which is how come I'm not giving his name away, because even though at this point it's 19 years later, you just never know. I mean, the company he worked for is no longer in existence. All the people who were above me, who basically colluded to get me out of there, are all gone. But it helped me to ease my mind because it let me know, okay, so this never really had anything to do with my work performance. This had something to do with them trying to find a scapegoat. And someone else knew that I had been a scapegoat. Now, this isn't the rest of the story. I hadn't been back to that hospital in 7 years, so I go to Albany for a conference. And it's yucky. I'm just bored to death. So I decide I'm leaving home early. It's already paid for. So I leave home early, and on the way back, I pass the area where this hospital is. I decide I'm going to stop by and visit some of the people I used to work with. And I hadn't seen almost any of them in years. I just totally avoided the thing. I had avoided seeing any of the people. I hadn't talked to anybody. But I decided to stop by. And the majority of the people I saw were extremely happy because it turns out a lot of them never really got the full story as to what happened. And, you know, I've always been one of those people as a leader where I work with people and I help people and we get along. And so I had a good rapport with almost all of them. There was only, as a matter of fact, there was one person who wasn't happy to see me, and that was because I had fired her nephew. So I had one person against me, but everyone else was pretty happy. Then I decided to go visit the hospital. And this was interesting because one of the powers that be, but who was not in the decision, was now the CEO. And someone else who was now one of the powers that be, but at the time was just another director, someone I worked with a lot. I got to talk to some of these people, and they both said that they figured out what was happening, but they were worried about losing their jobs. And they wished they could have said something, and they always supported me, but didn't want to take any chances. And I understood that, believe it or not. I actually did. So the thing is that I couldn't blame them because they lived in that community. You know, I have traveled a lot since I've been a consultant, but I traveled a lot as a kid, being a military kid. And I was much younger than they were. They all had kids. They'd gotten used to where they lived. They had no, you know, plans on going anywhere else. So they really couldn't support me on that, but they knew. And them telling me this years later showed me, okay, you know what, you guys are put in a tough position. I understand. I'm one of those people who always kind of stands up. That's what I do. That's what helps to make me a good consultant. Now, here's the thing. You know, we start to doubt ourselves sometimes, and we wonder, okay, what could I have done differently? In this particular instance, there's nothing I could have done differently. We had done good work. Then we had a blip in the road with that civil service exam. Had nothing to do with me. Probably the one thing I could have done was not made the powers that be look bad in a big meeting, because all the directors were there and they were there. And I was used to speaking my mind, and so I spoke my mind. And in retrospect, I would do the same thing again. Because you know what? I turned out to be right. These people opened up a brand new unit. They cleared everyone out of that area. And most of my people used to work in that area. So they cleared them out. They moved us off-site. They spent millions of dollars renovating this area, doing all this work. And a week before they opened it, I happened to ask someone, okay, what are the charges? What are you guys going to bill for? What are you doing? And they had no idea. So who jumps in? Me. I'm the guy who helps them set up a charge structure, help to set up a write-off structure so that they can at least, you know, we had to be able to bill, so they had to capture charges. And everything I said turned out to be true. Most of the people who ended up coming in were not the demographic that they said was going to come in, so they earned no money. They had this other unit, but because most of the people were at a level that they had the wrong insurance, they didn't qualify. So it turns out that over the course of 3 years, they ended up with 2 people who ever used the main unit that they had spent $1 million to build. And they'd also already hired all the doctors and all the nurses. So it took a major bath, way above my level. Sometimes you just have to stick to your guns. And sticking to your guns sometimes says you're going to lose something. Something's going to happen. And I think that I was upset at the time. I knew there was something up. But you have to kind of stick to your guns when you know you're right. And you will be proven right at some time. Now, does that help you in the long run? Yeah, it may help you in some ways. Because what that did is it showed me, you know what, I know my stuff. And I probably never would have become a consultant. Heck, I may have never left that hospital. And my life would have been totally different. So I think I like my life now. So anyway, trust yourself. If you think you know your stuff, trust yourself. Don't be afraid that the powers that be aren't always going to accept it unless you're kind of trapped in a certain situation where, you know, there are communities where there's only the one job. And you have to protect yourself, but you have to keep your dignity at the same time. That's what I have today. Y'all let me know what you think. Was I stupid for standing up to authority, although I didn't see it that way? Or did I actually leave the best advice and they just didn't like it? By the way, all those powers that be are no longer in healthcare. What does that tell you? Anyway, my name is Mitch Mitchell. For those of you who don't know me, I hope you like this video. I hope you subscribe to the channel. I'm always telling my stories. Most of the time I have a point. Sometimes I don't. And you know what? We just have a conversation. Y'all take care.